Have you ever known someone whose life seems to be defined by calamity? That bad thing after bad thing continues to keep happening to them and sort of set the stage for their life. As we turn our minds to the Lord's Supper, I want us to look at someone like that. And I want us to see how their terrible life was changed by grace, and how in that we see ourselves and our part of the story. You see, one day can define you. It can define you good or bad. But this one day defined a person in a negative way. Things started off well for Merib Baal. He was born into a wealthy, prominent family. His father, a valiant warrior, was next in line for the throne of Israel. So happened that this day, he was so proud of his grandfather, the king, and his father, because they went out to go and destroy those terrible Philistines on Mount Gilboa. But then word came that his grandfather, his uncles, and his father died on that battlefield. There was no national service or memorial that was given for his grandfather or for his father. You see, another man, his grandfather's enemy, had been appointed king by Yahweh. And in ancient times, when a king was defeated by his enemy, his entire generation was wiped out so that no one could come back and lay claim to the throne. That meant that they had to flee for their lives. That meant that even 5-year-old Merib Baal had to flee. Things went from bad to worse. Because as Merib Baal's protector, the one he trusted in, his nurse, as she grabs him up and they begins to flee, in her haste, she drops him. And he lands on his feet in such a way that they're crushed and he's lame for the rest of his life. You may know him better by another name. 2 Samuel 4 and verse 4 says, "Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a crippled son in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth." Mephibosheth, the word itself means either destroyer of shame or end of shame. And yet he will live for a large portion of his life in shame. Life was hard after that. I mean, how, as a crippled man, do you make a living? You can't walk behind a plow. You can't tend to a vineyard. They went from having everything, wealth, land, nobility, to having nothing. They were fugitives on the run. And over time, they came to the city of Lo-debar. The name sort of says it all. Lo-debar means literally no word or no thing. And it came to mean no pasture, meaning this wilderness of a place. Vagrants, misfits, those who seemed that Yahweh had forgotten. These are the people who lived here. And it was only by the generosity of Machir, son of Amiel, and his invitation to live in his house that Mephibosheth even survived. But he tried to make the best of it. For some, maybe 20 years, he tried to make the best of things. He married, and he had a son, Micah. But then there was another day that happened. We read in 2 Samuel 9, then David, King David, said, "Is there anyone yet left in the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "I am your servant." The king said, "Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodabar." And King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lodabar. Did you notice how Saul's servant Ziba referred to him? He didn't even mention him by name. He just said, "Oh yeah, Saul, the son of Jonathan, yeah, that crippled guy. Yeah, he's still around." Imagine the day that David's entourage came to Mephibosheth's house to get him. What did he think? Well, this is it. I'm going to die. Right before he left, did he kiss his son on the forehead one more time? He comes before King David and he prostrates himself, his face to the ground. And he says, "Here I am your servant." But he's not met with death. He's met with grace. You see, grace doesn't concern itself with a man's background or surroundings, or his ability, or his appearance, or even his future potential. David didn't look at the condition of Mephibosheth. He just took him as he was. Continuing the reading there in verse 7, David said to Mephibosheth, "Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly." Again he prostrated himself, that is Mephibosheth, and said, "What is your servant, that you should regard a dead dog like me?" And the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce, so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. Think about the grace that David showed Mephibosheth. The kindness that he showed because of the covenant that he had with Jonathan. He said, "Mephibosheth, all of your grandfather's estate, all of his land, all of that I'm giving to you. And I'm calling in his servant, Ziba. Ziba, you're going to be the one who oversees it. You're going to take care of all of it. You're going to cultivate it. You're going to bring in the produce for Mephibosheth and his family." But David didn't stop there. Did you catch what he did? says that he made him like one of his sons. Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. That's quite an upgrade from Lodabar to Jerusalem. Imagine the first time that Mephibosheth comes to the table of David. In my mind, I have it as in he's coming, but all of David's sons come and sit down first because it's hard when you're lame in both feet. It takes a while to get somewhere. What were his sons, David's sons, thinking? How could our father let this enemy, this crippled prince, come and sit down? It didn't matter. Because David said, "Welcome, my son." You see, this is our story as well. Only we weren't crippled, we were dead in our trespasses and sins. God didn't care about what we looked like. He just showed us grace. He made us alive in Jesus, and He seated us with our King in the heavenlies. As we join in the Lord's Supper, let us realize that we have come to the King's table. And it doesn't matter about your failures. It doesn't matter about what you should have done this past week. We are God's children. And this meal is about celebrating Jesus and what He has done for us. And so as we join together in this supper, I want to leave Ephesians chapter 2 up for you to read, because I want you to see your story in the story of Mephibosheth.